What is covetousness under the law of Moses? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible.
Of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5. We're going to be reading from verses 16 to 22. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Deuteronomy chapter 5, beginning at verse 16. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long, and that you may be well within the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. These words the Lord spoke to all your assembly in the mountain from the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the thick darkness with a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. Over the last 2 lessons, we've been discussing Moses' retelling of the 10 Commandments, which were part of the covenant that God made with Israel. We noted that because we're under the new covenant, we're not under the 10 Commandments today, though almost all of those commandments were commanded by God before Moses and after Moses. Only the 4th commandment, the one about the physical observance of the Sabbath, one which we discussed in the last lesson, was not repeated under the new covenant. The 1st commandment told Israel that they weren't to worship other gods, while the 2nd commandment stated that they weren't to make idols, either of the gods of the Canaanites or of Jehovah himself. The 3rd commandment was talking about not taking the name of the Lord in vain or using it irreverently, while the 4th commandment outlined how Israel was to rest from their work on the Sabbath day, what we would call Saturday. The 5th commandment deals with how children are to treat their parents. Children were to honor their father and mother. What does this mean? Well, it means that children are to hold their parents in high regard and respect them. When living at home, it means respecting your parents' authority. When a parent tells a child to do something, the child needs to be expected to do it. A parent must never let a child get away with disobedience, or they won't grow up to respect you. They will grow up to rebel against you. Now, I'm not saying a child who listens to you will never rebel, but a child who doesn't listen to you is almost certain to rebel. Once a child leaves the home, though, honoring father and mother takes on the added responsibility of caring for your parents if your parents need help. What was the reason that children were to honor their father and mother? Their days would be long in the land that the Lord their God was giving them. Children who respect their parents and listen to them tend to be children that keep themselves out of trouble and thus wouldn't do anything that would shorten the length of their lives. However, in the Old Testament, God was going to hold children responsible for honoring their parents as well. For in Deuteronomy 21:18 to 21, we're going to find that any child, and by child we're talking about older children who should know better, that does not heed the chastening of his parents, then he is to be taken to the gates of the city to be judged, and if found guilty, was to be stoned. This is how seriously God views the relationship between children and parents. The 6th commandment is that you shall not murder. Most would probably know this commandment better by the King James Version's rendering of it, which is thou shalt not kill. However, if the commandment means any killing, then that would preclude capital punishment, which we know is the penalty to many crimes under the old law. Going back to Genesis 9 verse 6, God told Noah that if someone kills another person, that person deserved to be put to death by the hands of man. That's why the New King James Version better translates this commandment as you shall not murder, which means the unwarranted and intentional killing of another human being. Murder has always been sinful in God's eyes, for each one of us has been created in God's image. It was sinful from the beginning, it was sinful under Moses, and it's sinful under Christ. The 7th commandment is, you shall not commit adultery. Adultery is a sexual relationship that occurs in which one of the parties at least is married. For the one who is married, the sexual act is adultery. But if there is a partner that is not married, the sexual act is fornication. That means that all adultery is fornication, but not all fornication is adultery. When God joins two people together in marriage, like he did Adam and Eve in Genesis 2:24, he expects them to become one flesh, something that would include becoming one sexually. By introducing someone else into the equation that who you are not married to, you have broken this one flesh relationship by God. How would adulterers be dealt with? They would be put to death. That's how serious God takes the marriage relationship. And even though the death penalty for adultery doesn't exist under Christ's law today, we should still view marriage with the same seriousness as God does. This brings us to the 8th commandment, which is a prohibition against theft. Taking something that is not ours has always been something that God has condemned. It does not matter if that item was small or insignificant in value, or if it was large. If something was not ours, we weren't to take it. Of all the 10 commandments, perhaps with the exception of lying or covetousness, theft is something that is so easy to do, in that it requires little time and forethought. And as long as something that wasn't taken wasn't valuable, maybe like office supplies in our day, society doesn't generally see anything wrong with that. God does. Under the law of Moses, the children of Israel were not to steal under any circumstance. The 9th commandment has to do with lying. To lie means that you did not tell the truth. Lying is not withholding information that another party didn't need to know. It is withholding information that a person did need to know, or not telling the truth when asked. Abraham lied to Abimelech when he didn't tell Abimelech that Sarah was his wife, instead saying that she was his sister. Abraham's story was half true, for Sarah was his half-sister. However, it was a lie because Abimelech needed to also know about Sarah's marital status, for Abimelech wanted to marry Sarah. Not telling the entire story when true, or telling something that is completely untrue, is lying and condemned here under the law of Moses. Specifically in this context, it is lying against one's neighbor, whether in court or simply to another person. But lying in general is also condemned here as well. Which brings us to the 10th and final commandment in this list, which is that Israel wasn't to covet what wasn't theirs. Coveting is not simply to have a desire for something, for we can desire things and not sin. It is unlawful or uncontrolled desire for something that would typically lead us to take it in an unlawful way. Verse 21 says that Israel was not to covet his neighbor's wife. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't acknowledge that she could be beautiful, but what would make it unlawful is if they lusted after her, which could lead to adultery. Israel was also not to covet his neighbor's male servant or female servant, ox, donkey, or anything that was their neighbor's. Again, this has to do with an uncontrolled desire that would typically lead to other sin. If someone had a nice animal, they could admire it. Or if someone had a productive servant, they could compliment the servant. But they couldn't have an uncontrolled desire of those things that were not theirs. If a person wanted his neighbor's ox, they could purchase it. However, stealing it would be wrong. So that's the 10 Commandments in their entirety, which would be preserved for Israel on 2 tablets of stone written by God and given to Moses. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 23 to 33, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.